What's going on, guys? Dan Watson, learningcameras.com. And it might have taken 4 years, but the 7D Mark II is finally here. And it brings things like 65-point all-cross type focus system, weather-sealed body, 10 frames a second shooting, and dual card slots. So we're going to take a look at this and see if really Canon has come out with something better and if it's a nice improvement over what we've seen before and also from the competition. Now, I also post the raw files at learningcameras.com, so you can check out the site and follow us there and download those for yourself and really kind of put these to the test, download them, take a look at the high ISO files, and make sure that they meet your standards as well before you go ahead and buy this camera. So that's one of the things you can check out at www.learningcameras.com. So let's take a quick look and a little bit more detailed look at this camera. Now, the 7D Mark II is definitely a well-built camera, just like its predecessor, and it has the weight and the heft to really prove it. And Canon says that this is one of their best built camera bodies, and I definitely believe them. All the right stuff seems here. You've got weather sealing and overall a body that functions a little bit more like something like the Canon 5D Mark III. In fact, it's pretty tough to tell the two apart from a side-by-side glance. With dual card slots and all the buttons and controls of the 5D III, you're really going to have no trouble using a 7D Mark II in professional uses. With 10 frames a second shooting and a buffer that allows you to shoot plenty of frames, sports photographers and wildlife photographers have probably found a great new tool to use. And the shutter is also quieter, and an additional quiet shutter setting makes it one of the quietest DSLRs I've ever used. Canon has also included GPS, a compass, and though they've left out Wi-Fi, which they say is due to the all-metal body, all of your standard controls are pretty easy to reach and where you'd expect them, though there doesn't seem to be a way to change the Kelvin white balance from the white balance button, and so instead you have to navigate through the Q menu for control. Now, one huge disappointment is that so far the exposure meter disappears from the LCD, as well as the viewfinder in manual mode. Now, there's a secondary exposure meter visible on the right side of the viewfinder. However, it's really not easy to see as a normal one, and both meters are visible during shooting when not in manual. So it's overall only when in manual that you're going to notice this. With 65 all-cross type points, this is definitely one of the most advanced focus systems in any camera, even a full-frame camera in some of Canon's professional lines. You have all the control points of the 5D III and even a couple extra to customize to your liking. In fact, you're going to have 5 tabs in the menu control just devoted to focus controls. In addition to that, you have dual pixel sensor, which also allows for fast and accurate focusing during live view and video. And overall, the 65-point AF system works as it should, solid amount of coverage across a frame. There were a couple times that I struggled to get focus on a couple of single points towards the edge, but these issues were really inconsistent at best, so it was tough to tell if it was a genuine issue or not. The center dual cross type focus point is rated to -3 EV at f8, so that's nice to see from this camera. Unfortunately, you can't link the spot metering to the AF point, so if you're using this mode, you might need to rely on those center AF points. Now, the dual pixel AF sensor also delivers as promised, just like my Canon 70D, and the 7D Mark II focus in live view and video is actually good enough to rely on. Not only is it really fast and accurate, but it's just one of the best systems that I've used from any type of mirrorless camera or DSLR in live view and video shooting, which makes it a great complement for video shooters. First things first, let's get a couple of image tests out of the way. In low light, the Canon 7D Mark II is definitely an improvement over the Canon 70D. It shows almost no noise up until about 1600 ISO, but it still looks great up to about 6400 ISO, and that's when we start getting some issues with it up until about 12,800 ISO, when noise begins to get a little bit too heavy and we lose the smooth transitions between colors and shadows. But overall, I would say with some noise reduction, these files would actually be usable. I also put the 7D up against the full-frame 5D III, and I was actually pretty impressed with the results. Working my way up, it was pretty difficult to see the differences between the two up until around 1600 ISO, when the 7D has just a few more issues in the shadows, but honestly, even up to around 6400 ISO, the files were close enough you can hardly notice the difference, and after some noise reduction, it really wasn't up until about 12,800 ISO that the 5D started to take a definite lead. Overall, the 7D Mark II is definitely one of the best APS-C sensors that I've seen on the high ISO side, but let's take a look at some of the negatives. And that is, even in the low ISO files, you're able to see some of the issues with grain and lack of, or just a little bit more grain in the shadow areas and lack of detail when you boost those up compared to some of the other competitors out there. And I really feel like Canon should be doing a little bit more about this. So, even though this is a good solid camera at high ISOs, it does have some issues that it shows, and nothing that would be extremely noticeable, but just a little bit worse than some of the competitors from something like Nikon or Sony. Now, for those of you who don't care about video recording, go ahead and skip to the next section, but I did want to give this some attention because we do use these cameras for video recording, and the 70 Mark II has some really good things and some really not so good things going for it, so we're going to take a look at those. Now, Canon was one of the first ones with 1080p video, but they've been one of the last to do anything beyond that, and you do get up to 60 frames a second, which Nikon and Sony have been doing for quite some time now, but that's it. No 4K recording or anything like that. And I know most people are saying, well, I don't need to master out to 4K right now. However, it's pretty key to future-proofing your stuff. You can either master to 4K to keep for later, or my favorite thing to do is to master out to 1080p and keep your 4K recordings for cropping, panning, stabilizing, all of this other stuff that you can do in post. That's huge to me. Thankfully, you can actually output uncompressed 4.2.2 from the HDMI port for those of us who have external recorders. Unfortunately, video quality from Canon DSLRs has just lacked in sharpness and looks a bit on the muddy side compared to some other cameras, and the 70 Mark II is no exception. That said, this still is the best Canon camera I've used for video, and it performed exceptionally when I was filming a wedding. There are a few missing features that I would like, but it's nice that we have the ability to control AF speeds and time lapse. The dual pixel is dead accurate, which is nice, so it gives us some options for focusing, though lacking a touchscreen on this made it a little more difficult to change your AF point than on the Canon 70D. These cameras with a dual pixel AF are the first DSLRs with good enough AF to actually track moving subjects reliably, and I found that I was able to hold focus on people walking down the aisle with AF enabled, which previously you've been unable to do. You also have a mic input, headphone output, and the ability to adjust levels on both while recording. That said, you will not find any other video features like focus peaking, zebras, or any of the custom profiles for capturing more dynamic range. Now, noise performance was actually pretty good with almost no noise up until about 3200 ISO, and still decent results at 6400 ISO. By 12,800, the hit is pretty noticeable, but with some noise reduction, it's probably usable in some cases. Compared to the 5D3, the 7D holds its own as you move up the dial up until about 6400 ISO, and then again it handily beats the noise performance from the Canon 70D at 6400 ISO despite it having the same sensor. Overall, this has been my favorite Canon DSLR to videotape with, even more than the Canon 5D3 and the Canon 70D. Now, I do wish it had some things like an articulating touchscreen, but overall the advantages of this camera definitely outweighed the disadvantages. Unfortunately, there are better options when it comes to video, especially when it comes to image quality from some of the others like the Sony A7S and the GH4, even the upcoming Samsung NX1, so there's some competition in the marketplace. However, if you're a Canon shooter, this is the video DSLR camera that I would be using for my productions. Overall, the 70 Mark II really feels like an uncompromised camera, which is a nice break from other cameras like the Canon 6D and the T5i, which do not have that same ability. I mean, you've got so many pro features in here with the AF system, fast shooting, dual card slots, build quality. The list goes on to make this seem like a much better camera than it is, and despite having an APS-C sensor, it really performed almost as good as Canon's full-frame sensors, so it really starts to blend the line a little bit more than what we've seen in the past. If you're a sports or wildlife shooter, this camera is probably going to blow you away, even if you're used to something like the 1DX, just because of some of the options that it has, and it's able to do it for far less than you were capable of with something like a 1DX or a Nikon D4. So definitely an option for you guys. Now, for the rest of you, there is some competition in the marketplace that you might want to take a look at. That said, this is definitely one of the better Canon DSLRs we've ever seen. Now, if you're shooting landscape, something like the Nikon D610, or if you're willing to pay a little bit more, the D750, which is a lot better camera, I think, is going to be a better fit for you because that sensor just produces some unbelievable dynamic range. If you're a wedding photographer even, this is really a compelling option because it has your build quality and exactly what you'd expect, and the only downside would have been that smaller frame or the smaller sensor size, which honestly is beginning to not matter as much as it did in the past. So I'd be willing to take a look at this. Now, if you're looking at the Nikon side, the only other camera that's even close to this in price is going to be the D750, and once again you have that awesome sensor in there. However, you don't have quite the pro features and pro build and pro body that you would see in this camera, which you do see in something like the Canon 5D3 or the Nikon D810 if you can afford it. So those are going to be your top cameras out there, but if you're looking for something under that price, this is really one of your best options on the marketplace right now. For videographers, the choice is going to be a little bit tougher because the Canon 7D is just one of the best Canon DSLRs, and Canon has a bunch of lenses that support video shooting and things like that. So, plus you've got that awesome AF system to go along with it, so it's nice to have that ability. However, there are some other cameras coming up on the marketplace that do have some enhanced movie shooting modes and movie shooting abilities with higher dynamic range and even RAW or different profiles that you can put those on. So those are some compelling options to consider. But once again, I keep coming to this. This is definitely the best Canon DSLR for video shooting that I've run across, and the one that I would be shooting with from now on if you're going to be shooting Canon. The 7D Mark II is clearly going to be a big win for Canon on this one. Sure, there are some little things that could be better, and I do wish Canon had put a little bit more into the raw performance and picture quality of the Canon sensor that they're using in this compared to some of the Nikon sensors. But overall, this is really a good camera and has all the features that you need to have for most of your video or photo projects. And so this is really going to be a compelling option to you. Once again, take a look at learningcameras.com, download those files and see for yourself. They're raw files, you can manipulate them yourself and determine it. Feel free to comment in the forums or take a look at some of the other stuff that we offer. But overall, this is definitely a compelling option from Canon. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.